have access to the Google Meets?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Should we just dive in?
Let's dive in.
That's you can thank my dog for being here today if you hear some background noise.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining here today. My name is Dr. Dave Talavera. I'm joined here by our, fearless leader here at the CFC, Dr. Lacey-Bisetty. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself in case there's any first-time viewers, first-time listeners, and what we'll be talking about today?
Yeah. So I'm Will. I'm a decolonial neuropsychologist, and so that means that I take a view when we're talking about mental health through the lens of how colonial systems and structures and their offsprings around like white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, all those kind of things are built to control and cause stress on our mental health, and a lot of our mental health difficulties we experience in life are natural responses to oppressive systems. And so that's kind of the initial framing I take with everything, and that's a lot of these series that we talk about here are tied to understanding how those things play a role in our experience in life.
Totally. Yeah. And I really want to come back to all those points there in a bit and how they play a role with what we're talking about today. And then just quickly before that, again, my name is Dr. Dave Talavera. I focus on behavioral health. I also have an expertise in working with, like our physiology. I have a chronic pain experience background as well. And so I love to integrate very like micro level stuff in terms of what your body goes through, what you're noticing. But I'm always really appreciative of conversations like this because I think it really zooms out of what's happening in our body, and really we have like this big question of why is this happening in our body type of thing. And I think we just heard our CFC mascot, Winnie, bark in the background, which you might hear every now and then. Love it.
But she's really cute and not as scary as she sounds, so yeah. And but we love our dog because dogs are also part of our community.
100%. Yeah. It's a bark of love that she's saying.
Yeah. And today we're here to talk about, in particular, burnout and how it affects especially like people in the workspace and at school or in the
conference room
to the classroom.
Will had a lot of trouble with that one.
Yes. I kept thinking about the courtroom, which wasn't helpful.
I think you're thinking courthouse or courtroom. Courthouse.
Both. Yeah. You gotta have a little of both. Either way, we want to stay out of there. Yeah.
Yeah. We will.
Today isn't about prison abolition. We could talk about that as well.
I was just
and it
say
is tied to burnout and 100%. What people experience, but not the courtroom today.
You're just thinking about the next step ahead in terms of how do we dismantle these things.
Exactly.
That's what it was.
Yeah. We gotta dismantle all of it.
100%. But again, great topics today from again the classroom to the conference room, and really what that is in different spaces that we occupy in our lives. I think. We've had a really good kind of core series with burnout, and this is our last one that we'll be talking about with burnout, or actually
the penultimate one.
Yeah, the penultimate one, I should say, because we have one more.
I think that. Oh no. Oh yeah.
Yes, we have one more.
I was wrong. I thought penultimate was last, but we have another one about parent caregiving burnout as well. Yeah.
And so I was just thinking about spaces with home and parents. And then the other two spaces that occupy a lot of our lives, school and work. And so it's so important that we talk about, again, not just what goes on emotionally, physiologically, but what's going on, I think some would say like in the background, but I think it's at the forefront of our experiences with these factors that influence burnout. So I want to start off with question, if that's all right.
Sure.
Well, for you, and it's just a kind of a basic question of like, why are we talking about burnout when thinking about like these systemic factors, and why isn't this framed as like what you can do for burnout as a self-care, and why are we talking about more systemic factors with burnout here?
Yeah, and I think it's because like burnout is like a tool of control in a lot of ways, right? The fact that so many of us feel burnt out and disconnected isn't some like accident. It's this like structural force meant to keep us isolated, separated, and controlled. And so through the lens particularly of like colonialism and capitalism, these like systemic structures of the workplace where all our value is tied to our output. So if we're continuously having to meet some production standard, some output to hold value in society, to get basic needs, to be able to survive, to have a roof over our head, of course we're going to end up in this place where we're feeling a lack of connection, right? And when we're isolated, we're more easily kind of controlled in that context of like, this is your experience, you have to dedicate time and energy to providing value to the 1%, basically. The people are in control, the people kind of making decisions. We have to continuously provide value to them through our output because our humanity isn't enough. And so, of course, that's going to lead to like feeling alone.
Right. And I have thoughts about both the classroom setting and the conference room setting. I think that there's a lot of distinctions, obviously, between those. But then there's also a lot of similarities with burnout, how we experience it. I'm hoping to talk maybe a little bit about the distinctions first. Maybe we start with the classroom first. And I'm curious, you have a pediatric specialty as well. I'm sure you see a lot of parents, teachers who also experience burnout. I see a lot of adults, college students as well. And so how do you feel if we talk a little bit about the classroom first and just kind of exploring that a little bit more?
Yeah, because I think it brings up a good framing too of like this experience of like when you're in school and you're in these educational systems, you do have other spaces of built-in connection. And a lot of it is like built to prepare you for either the workforce or prison for the most part. And that's the kind of like setup it's in, but it is another space to build relationships and connection that we quickly lose over time. And so, I think it makes sense to kind of start with this understanding of like the relational settings and systems we're in when we are in school and how those get more and more siloed and more focused on how do I provide like shareholder value basically over time.
Right. There's a lot of great literature on how the education system has been oftentimes modeled after factories, after getting people all doing the same tasks as quickly as possible, and really focused on output and production, and I'd say a lot more so than personal experience and growth. And I say that just from my understanding in working with a lot of college students, my own college experience as well. But I wanted to see if you had thoughts on that from like a pediatric viewpoint of how that's kind of reinforced in that space.
Yeah, and I think like the thing that always stands out in that is like how school systems are set up to like obtain compliance in so many ways, because like you said, they're kind of training you for the workforce or prison, right? So they're like telling you that you have to learn to function and act and process the world in a certain way down a certain path, and if you don't, if you leave that, then like in school you're in trouble, right? And trouble leads to like punishment. So we get this really early experience of learning that if you don't do what you're told, if you don't follow this exact course you're taught, you deserve to be punished, right? You deserve pain, you deserve violence in all these different ways, whether that be physical or emotional in any context. We're taught that that is the appropriate response to someone not doing that, right? So then when you leave that space, your brain has been trained not only for yourself that I must comply or else, but also if someone else is doing something that doesn't comply, that an appropriate response is violence and like punishment and pain and all these kind of things that we see. And that's why as adults, when we see people harmed by groups like ICE and the police and stuff like that, our brains have been taught our whole lives that that is an appropriate response to that, rather than, like you said, like growth and teaching and learning. It's focused on punishment and harm.
What I'm hearing you here say is that what a lot of the schools are doing right now is creating a foundation for how we maneuver through the workplace later in life. It's kind of setting us up to really view burnout productivity with a certain lens, viewing burnout as maybe this is my fault for not being able to keep up, viewing productivity as I have to keep productive at all times. That's what I was taught since a young age. But what that made me think of is how much of this is taught and how much of this is maybe taught unknowingly as well. I know just from a personal experience, I kind of grew up with my parents saying, you have to do well in school so you can get a good job, so you can support your family. So, and it was this thread of money and survival. And looking back, and now having my own child, is that the message I want to give my child? This message of, if you don't produce, if you don't get good grades, your economic future's at jeopardy, your worth, your productivity, your family is in jeopardy. So I think a lot of this also comes down to what we hear as kids. And so I was curious what your take was on like a parenting perspective of what like parents can do in this situation and what they tell their kids type of thing.
Yeah, and it's so hard because like a lot of things that people talk about with a lot of systemic structures, and like Bell Hooks talks a lot about this in the context of like patriarchal systems, which are overlap in a lot of ways. But it's this experience of like, even if you're like the best parents in the world and you instill this in so many ways in your kid from day one, then they get to the school setting, and then all of a sudden all these societal constructs are going to be enforced on them, and then they have the choice again to either comply or receive retribution and pain and punishment of some kind, whether that be from like teachers, or whether that be from admin, or whether that be from peers, of like, you're not conforming to this thing that the rest of us are taught is the way it's supposed to work. And so that can lead to a lot of those kind of like disconnects and stress in that experience. And so it requires like such an active role by like parents. But when we get in the space of viewing like parenting and like the individual family system as the whole construct, we're going to lose the thread, right? It's about building those community connections, 100%. Building those lines of people that like, I know like this is what I'm teaching my kid, and I know when they're going to go into this space, it's other spaces that we've built and developed and connected with people to kind of maintain those things, because society's like big, right? Like these are like systemic structures that are going to like really like mess with your brain in so many ways. And I think, we see a lot of that friction occur, especially when you start entering more global spaces like that.
Totally, and I'm also a big proponent of educating, changing minds versus shaming and guilting, and I say that because from my own experience again, and hearing that from my parents, I would not turn to them and say, how can you say this to me as a kid, and hold that shame and judgment and guilt. Because if we take a big step back, they're also part of that system. And I'm thinking of not just my parents, but many immigrants who fall into this system not by choice, but by exploitation. And so they're kind of pushed to this brink of exhaustion and survival, so much so that that message carries across to the next generation of you have to produce, make money,
and you
or
have
else
to exhaust yourself, right? It's like, because the end point isn't like, hey, you did it, you've worked hard enough, and now you have everything, right? And that's often the framing, like a capitalistic society in particular gives us, is that we do enough and then we have whatever we want, right? Like the American dream, all that kind of shit. It's this experience, crap. I don't know if I should swear, but I can't.
You followed up with another swear after that.
And so, like that's kind of taught. And so it's this glorification of burnout, this glorification of like exhausting yourself, that if you're not, that means you're not doing enough, right? And like we talk all the time about that experience that happens of like anyone, like when the framing is how hard you work decides your value. That's what we're taught. It's not true, but that's what we're taught. So then that means if you have a lot, that means everyone is taught to believe you work hard, and if you don't, that means you don't work hard, which kind of adds to these divides and these systems of production. I think to like bring it back to the school side of things, like I think I'm wondering your thoughts on that, like the college experience. I think a lot of people have in that same lens of like never, like you're always need to be doing more. You're never doing enough. That kind of stuff.
I mean, if you think about it, just getting into college, with a lot of the people that I've worked with, they look back at the experiences in their application, and a lot of the extracurricular activities were done purely to get into college. It was this act of community, this act of giving back, a lot of the times purely to put on your college resume to increase your chances to go to like that next step that you want to take in your life. And I think that speaks not to an individual level of, wow, this person or these people are selfish. I think that speaks to what has been constructed by this system, this idea that even community giving has been co-opted by this capitalistic perspective of it has to be for something. It has to be to either reflect for your resume, it has to be either for you to be trained into doing something else, versus just purely the act of helping someone out, versus purely the act of learning. Exactly. And so that's another thing that I think about in the college experience is I think there's a lot of understandably emphasis on class and passing courses and that learning what's in the textbook. All of that information is absolutely important. I think there's less of an emphasis on growth as a person, on community building in the education system, and I mean really a big de-emphasis, if that's a word, but a lot of that on joining an organization just for the sake of joining an organization, and I think our college systems can do better with really encouraging folks to join communities, to establish friend groups versus solely burning out in passing that test or passing that final, right?
Yeah, and I think it's hard because I think this is a point where I have I would say a little more radical view on it, and that I think the college system and structures, the idea of them doing more to promote that, conflicts with why they exist, right? And in so many ways, I think they exist to uphold those structures, right? They're built very intentionally to these are the pathways to providing value in a capitalistic society. And so if you're not doing that, you're not holding value, right?
100%,
that kind of stuff. And so I think it's hard to because I mean, even think of when there's protests and stuff like that, universities will start kicking kids out of school because they're protesting, which is technically legal in America, or supposed to be, right? All these kind of things are happening so consistently, and then we're stuck in this pattern of why aren't they doing better? And it's because they want to do that. And that's the hard part that I always kind of confront in these things is these educational systems offer you access to spaces, but also they're the gatekeepers to make sure that only the people who learn their way and do things their way are the ones that can succeed,
And I very much agree with you. I think what I was trying to say is that the system itself in the the rules that the system operates in have to be changed. And I think it's either changing it from within of what we can do right now or completely abolishing it. And I would say if we can completely reinvent our school system, I'd say let's do it, and why not, type of thing.
So you're pro-abolition of the school systems?
I think let's
get rid of schools.
Let's tear it down to rebuild it, and I really do think that that's what it takes for a lot of our school systems, and in a peaceful way. And I always advocate peace for this. But I think a lot of what our school systems do is are factory lines to a job, and I really truly say that because I think for the majority of people that I've spoken with, from my own experience, and just people I've worked with, is they see college as a stepping stone towards that future profession of yours, and that's an understandable perspective to have. At the same time, if we solely view it as a stepping stone for employment, it becomes training for employment, and so that already becomes part of that system. And so I totally see that we have to kind of tear it down to rebuild it again in a nonviolent way and purely figuratively.
I mean, I do quickly want to say, like Kwame Ture said, is peaceful protests only work if your oppressors have a conscience. And so yes, peaceful would be great. It's not always functional, and I think we're seeing that in different contexts where I think a lot of people, with Trump, for example, have peacefully protested for a long time, and we're still seeing Trump do Trump things. You know? And I'm not here advocating for violence. I'm just saying, it's pretty clear, that process doesn't always help. And I think that's why, being more vocal and deliberate in how we use our language and talk about things is how we can kind of push back against these structures, right? Allow us to advocate in a more direct way, and kind of make people listen rather than hoping that they listen. Because these institutions are deep, right? This is very in depth, and even when we reflect on education through history, this has not always been how education's worked. I mean, we've all heard about philosophers from hundreds of years ago and stuff like this, and they weren't providing shareholder value, right? They were given places to stay and to live to think about stuff, right? Could you imagine that now? No, it's all tied to can you think about stuff that will make Lockheed Martin money and stuff like that.
Or bring the university more money, or research this thing to
think about
potentially start
our
a patent.
programs and stuff too. Of the people who get to stay in their positions are the ones who get funding, right? So even in an educational institution with people who are doing research, which is supposedly to advance our knowledge, they're only allowed to stay if they can bring in enough money for the university.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, if we think about this in terms of burnout at every level in academics, I mean, talk about burnout in graduate school, and the especially for or including those spaces that are research based, and how much of that is how much of those programs are carried on the backs of burnt out researchers and graduate students and teaching assistants who are trying to manage a full caseload, research, and then coursework as well. And that's what I was thinking about in terms of the academics as well, you know, starting from, you know, pre-K all the way through graduate school. There's this understanding that this is for employment all the way through graduate school. And I think our pet mascot's taking a little walk. And so we'll...
No, and I think like to offer a personal reflection on that is like my experience in grad school was one of like, I got like real depressed. Like I got like so depressed by having to constantly meet these standards my brain couldn't manage and handle effectively. And part of that was like my ADHD brain as well, and like all the production stuff that comes with that. But it was this experience of constantly feeling like I couldn't get all the stuff done because there was too much to do all the time. And like the wild thing for me to reflect on back is like I didn't even think about that until I like got through it to different phases where like grad school was that experience, and then like internship was like more of that, and postdoc was more of that. And it took me like halfway through postdoc before I was like, oh my God, this is just like unsustainable. And that's like 7 years into this process, right? So for like 7 years, I was like thinking like, this is how it's supposed to work, right? I'm supposed to feel this way because everyone else is, rather than going like, oh my God, this is awful, right? Why would you do this to somebody, that kind of thing.
And there's a lot of normalizing of those experiences, this idea that that's what you're supposed to do in graduate school. You're supposed to suffer and be burnt out. But if we look at that from a different angle of, would you want your research done by a completely burnt out graduate student? Would you want to be seen as a patient by a completely burnt out, overwhelmed graduate student? Or would you want to be training your future doctors completely burnt out, right? And so I think, you know, conversations like this hopefully identify some of those factors there that need changing desperately. And I have heard kind of rumblings of graduate students unionizing and
it's happened some places,
and really fighting for not just wage but workload improvements, because just again from a personal experience, it is unbelievable.
It's like 68-hour weeks and you're making like 12 grand a year, you know, it's
literally
wild.
In very expensive locations as well, where the cost of living is very difficult. And so
well, not for us, but
Houston. I was thinking of my Boston peers there, working there. I mean, it's not livable. And so, you know, that burnout that we see there, what I wanted to come back to was the normalizing part, and not just seeing it as like a badge of like, wow, this person's working so hard, they're burnt out, but also like normalizing that of, yep, that's what you do at every stage in education. And again, I think that is the language that is being primed and prepped for the workspace. 100%. So that when you enter the workspace, it's not just normalized, it's something that is almost instinctual. Like, okay, I'm just waiting for the next burnout, and this is what I am going to do for it. Versus doing what you can to really kind of fight those systemic factors that perpetually lead to burnout.
And then it's like pathologized after that, right? Of like, now your burnout is your problem, right? Because like something's wrong with you if you're feeling burnt out because everyone else is doing this and we're all fine, right?
Yeah.
But really, everyone's feeling this again and again. It's just this cycle of who is at that breaking point, who is at that point of like no return often, where you're kind of like beaten to submission. And then not only are you burnt out and it's now viewed as a problem of yours, but then you're supposed to go like self-care your way out of it, right? You're supposed to go to therapy, right? You're supposed to like go do like meditation, yoga, like whatever it is. You're supposed to like go do something to fix your burnout, right? to fix the fact that you're burnt out by a system intentionally burning you out. And then that's commodified as well, and that's a whole other process. But it's this continuation and cyclical aspect of it that's just like exhausting to think about. And you're so right that like transition from like school, you're prepped in all those ways, and now you're in the workforce and you're like, yes, this is how it works, and now I get paid, you know, this like slight bump, so now it's okay, right? Instead of recognizing that like we're repeating these same patterns and we're just setting everyone up to feel so secluded and isolated. You know?
And that brings me to like two things, and I think just looking at timing, I think it'll be a nice transition to talk about the workplace now. I think we just walked into that space there. But if you have questions, write them in about school, and you know we'll be happy to go back to that topic as well. But one of the things that I was thinking of that you mentioned, was about thinking about this as like, I mentioned the word instinctually. I think you were also talking about it there, and how instinctually it is to think of burnout as this, I have to do something about it. That it is my responsibility to only think about this, and by default, that means my employer doesn't have to think about this. This is my doing.
Go get some help.
I have to go figure this out on my own, whether it's, you know, and you touched on this a little bit, but the big commodification of self-help right now, which is a huge industry out there right now. I think I was just reading an article, it's billions worth of dollars, and that is it has a capitalist thumb on the scale, I say foot on the scale there, to really push people to think that it is a solitary experience to do self-care, that I have to do the breathing, I have to do the mindfulness meditation, I have to get myself out of this burnout hole that I dug myself into, or that is normal to go into, which is not, right?
I do that by paying other resources.
But where I wanted to go with this is that it doesn't have to be a solitary experience. And that is something that I am really thinking about with the people I work with the literature that's out there, that self-care, I think inherently has this self-word in it, or obviously has the self-word in it, but the self-care doesn't have to be solitary. It can be a community aspect there. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that, but I wanted to mention that I think something that people can do to really break these cycles a little bit more is not just what I can do, but what can my employer do as well to really shift that burden and that onus not just on yourself, but on the other person who's playing a big role in this.
Yeah, and I think that plays into like things around like, especially like big capitalistic things of like time theft and wage theft and like expectations of work outside of it. Because a lot of spaces, and especially like health spaces like we work in, if you start doing like what you're paid for, the like whole system's going to shut down, because the expectation is that you go above 100%. And beyond all the time, right? So that you're expecting that from you, and it's like a lot of times the only way to like hold an employer or something like that accountable is to like actually do what you're supposed to, but that has to be done in a like connected way, right? If it's like an individual is going to get punished, right, because they're ostracized in that context, whereas we as a collective do that, and that's why people believe in things like a general strike, right? Of like everyone just stop working and kind of force the hand of all the employers, because it's like it's a class thing, right? These people are like, and it's not like you're necessarily your employer is the class up, but like they're representing and kind of reinforcing those systems of the like class, the like ruling class, and when those things happen, they're going to lead to this control aspect, and like one person can't change that. We have to do it together, right? And that's why unions have been so effective in so many spaces, for like good in a lot of spaces and like bad in some spaces, because when we come together, we can enact real change, and that's a really hard thing to like get to sometimes, because we're burnt out and we feel so alone. So the idea of like building what we call class consciousness feels really impossible at times, because we're so siloed so intentionally.
And I think there's always the psychology of, and so what you're making me think of is something that I've thought about a lot, is, you know, the psychology of unions. I think a lot of the discourse oftentimes has been that unions, especially, you know, from just talking with my parents, when their understanding of unions from an immigrant perspective is that unions will help you make more money or fight for your just wages. But unions do so much more than that. And I think the psychology of creating a union, of being in a union, already has this idea of having someone's back and you knowing that they have your back. There's this collectivity around it. And so there's this sense of support. And from a mental health standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, that is invaluable because what the system wants is to make you feel alone and isolated and to work on this burnout on your own. And unions offer a very contrasting idea to that you're not alone and that we'll fight for you type of thing.
And they'll stop that exploitation, right? Because no ruling class member has ever given anything to a working class person, right? It's always been taken through, like what you're talking about. Unions are like one of the biggest representations ever of class consciousness and kind of coming together to work against those structures and support each other rather than the powers that be. And like that only comes from the ability to connect with people. That only comes from revolutionary ideas and thinking outside of the lens that were given to us. And for like unions in particular, that was done by a lot of especially like Black people in like Detroit was a huge movement, auto unions, all that kind of stuff. Like these are historical things that have been done when we start to think outside of what we're told. And like that brings it back a little bit to the education system where we're always kind of taught the same pathway, the same thing of what is possible. And it's just so hard to like not fall into that, right? It's so hard to think creatively when not only are we taught to conform in our day-to-day life, but also in how we think, and that kind of groupthink aspect. So to come together outside of what we're taught is such an extremely powerful thing, but also it's a really hard thing to actually access.
100%. And I like that you brought it back to education because there was something that I wanted to bring up that I think just gets stamped out in our education system, and that's the power to say no. And that is just for me, I would never think that that's a possibility looking back at my middle school, high school experience. I don't want to do this, I don't want to go to this class. And sure, we had a few options, but I didn't want to take a certain class or do a certain task or X, Y, and Z, right? And so there's already this language expectation and behavior modeling that saying no is a bad thing, and you have to say yes to these things, to these tasks, because it'll make you more productive, you'll learn more, X, Y, and Z. But so then when we enter the workforce, this saying no has been stamped out so much that when we say no, the emotions that come up for folks, I'm sure, are guilt, or anxiety, or maybe even sadness that I can't keep up with this type of thing. And so I bring this up because the power of no is such an important thing to think about when we're thinking about burnout. And what I mean by that, obviously, is like you saying, I can't take on this extra project. It's too much for me, and I can't do it. Versus, I guess this is what I got to do and work until I burn out.
Right. And I think that like only really can happen when we detach our value from our production, right? Because like it's like the no thing you're talking about, right? Like the reason we're taught that is like it's coercion, right? Like we're taught that we cannot make a decision for ourselves. We're being coercively controlled. And that's like a huge like patriarchal structure in society is like this violent oppression of people, right? This violent control of people. And like, I know sometimes it sounds harsh saying like it's violent, but it is like a violent act to not let someone be able to make decisions for themselves, for their own well-being. They are forced to think through that lens of like, I have to provide this outcome and value or else I don't hold value. Or now my job's at risk. Now my position at school is at risk because I'm saying no and no one else is, right? Because the no isn't just pushing back against your employer or like your teacher or your parent. You're pushing back against a system of coercive control that's instilled in everybody. So it's this like violent response is often met with no in a lot of ways. And that's something that like I think a lot of people feel in a lot of space and a lot of guilt and shame and stuff like that, but it's especially true in like patriarchal relationships and especially as it pertains to like female presenting people and the violence they get for saying no in all sorts of contexts because of how we like stunt the growth and emotionality of male presenting people.
100%. And I'm also thinking about this from, again, immigrant perspectives, those individuals that don't speak English as well. Even the idea of saying no might mean being fired, and I know you touched on this as well, or being reprimanded, or being labeled as that person who doesn't work hard, and so they might not be called up for future work as well.
Or thrown in jail.
Or thrown
deported,
in jail, or deported, 100%. And so what a lot of this is also, or it is this system really pushing people to the brink and giving them no other choice but to say yes. And who is not going to feel burnt out in those situations that when they feel like yes is their only option, right? And so
we're often taught it's like a good thing, right? Of like the yes is like, oh, look at them, they're a go-getter, and if you don't, that means you don't care, right? And because your value is tied to that, it's such a like intense process that we're like so like mindfucked that not only are we thinking like we can't say no, but like the yes and burning ourselves out is the good thing, like you talked about earlier, that like continuous aspect of like glorification of burnout and all that kind of stuff, and like hard work and all that.
The last thing I'll know is I've come to terms with just saying no. I've had kind of this evolution of it just from my own, first generation survivor's guilt, and then just guilt of my parents sacrificing so much to get here. And I'm sure if you're an immigrant, you can understand some of that as well. And at first, I was in this idea of I can't say no because my parents sacrificed so much, or I can't say no because then that'll limit me from the next step. And then I kind of evolved into this like next place of like, well, I'll just say no to certain things, not all the things that I should say no to. And then like I gradually moved on. What if I just say no to the thing and not to the person? And just kind of rationalizing to myself to kind of tiptoe around this idea that, it's not you, it's just this thing. And so now I've just kind of come to this idea that it's just okay to say no. That there's this idea that you have to explain yourself, or you have to give like your rationale of why you're saying no. You don't have to, and I think that's also part of that system. This system, I think, will seep its way into every last bit to really make sure that you keep working at all costs.
Yeah, I think that's something I think about with like my emails now, of like historically like being sick or saying you can't do something or something like that. I'm like, oh no, like I'm going to be in so much trouble, right? And like this feeling of like when I like have to cancel or do stuff, I literally just say like, hey, I have to cancel, I have to reschedule, thanks for understanding, right? And like trying to take that away. And I think like thinking through that lens, so it's important to reflect on the fact that like the privilege we have in society in so many ways is like, people with like education, access, the way we look, all those kind of things allow us to like do that with very minimal risk. And that's not true for a lot of people. And that's going to cause a lot more stress and harm. The saying no is like a great theoretical thing, but it requires all of us to kind of support each other and push this forward. It's not going to happen just from an individual, right? And that's like the thing we always want to come back to is like, this is a community no, right? This is a community effort to kind of change these systems, because it's going to be really hard to experience that when you don't have privilege and safety behind it, when your like life does depend on saying the yes, because that's how they really kind of maintain that control. And like while we're thinking about this kind of like lens of like, yes, these things sound great in theory, and what do we actually do about it? It's like a lot of times we talk about like managing burnout and like taking time for ourselves and caring for ourselves and stuff like that. But how do you actually do that when you're like burnt out? How do you find time for it?
Yeah. So I think the first step just comes with like identifying burnout. I think burnout is one of those things where you feel like you're in like that toad in hot water. You don't know it's boiling until like it's really boiling type of thing. And so I think identifying what it feels like to be burnt out is a first step. And so like just kind of do a check-in with yourself first. If you're feeling like you can't sleep because what you're thinking about is work, or you're stressed out about the next day, if you're really struggling with the Sunday scaries a lot every weekend, if you're losing interest in things that you normally like to do, or if you're just so apathetic about your job, and maybe it's a job that you enjoy doing, maybe it's a job where, like myself, I love what I do, and that's also rare, but if you start to feel that apathy towards what you do, that's when you start to really kind of ask your questions of, okay, am I burnt out here. And then taking a step further of just kind of noticing your physiology. If you're noticing that you're just tense all the time, if you're curt with others, if you're feeling like just obviously overwhelmed with it, that's all this is like a constellation of signs that you are in or you're approaching burnout. And I start off with those super basic things because oftentimes people either don't admit or don't realize they're burnt out until they're way into it. And so it's always good to just kind of check in on those first signs there.
And that don't admit part is so like important of like just like speaking about these things and communicating this with like the people who are in these spaces with you can offer a lot of like positive experiences because it takes away that individuality of it, right? Because we're shamed into thinking like, again, burnout is a like moral failing on ours, right? Or like having a problem with burnout is. And so finding ways to like share that and communicate and be vulnerable with that experience, that's what allows people to be like, yeah, me too, right? And then like you say me too, and then you say me too, and then you say me too, and then we're all like, oh, wait a minute, like we need to do something about this. And then it's all of us going in that space rather than 100%. The siloed experience, this burnout and the shame and guilt that comes with it. We have to like come together in that process. And like the more we can like be proactive about it, the more it's gonna connect in a lot of ways.
Well,
I was wondering, you said sorry, this was just me, but like that metaphor, the toad in the hot water, what is that?
I heard of that in college, where if like you're a toad in a hot pot of water, and the temperature is slowly rising, that toad will not jump out because it won't notice the temperature change if it's incremental. Only if it's a sudden change, it'll drop out. It'll jump out. And so if you're in the chat and if you know this, if it's real, please let me know. Hashtag Toadgate today. I heard it in college. Either my professor was just making up idioms and
also like
continuing them.
Who's testing that out? Who's killing toads out there slowly?
The burnt out researchers.
They don't know that they're slowly killing toads, or are they killing the toads because that is the research?
No toads were harmed in this.
We have never harmed a toad.
No toads were harmed. We're pro-toad here.
We're pro-toad.
Yes.
We've always been pro-toad.
100%.
Toad.
Well, actually, that reminds me, and I wanted to bring
You're not
really
pro-toad?
good thing. No, yes, pro-toad.
I hate toads, by the way.
Never
liked them.
The more psychedelic, the better for me. I actually wanted to come back to this, and it's funny because where I heard that was in this class that I loved this class. And so I forgot my professor's name, but the professor who said this, it was actually it was a business class I took, and burnt out young Dave in college was like, I need to have an easy class. Like and that also speaks to what being burnout does. It pushes you towards a lack of self-development, a lack of learning, and more of a just, I want to get through this. And so I was at this, I just want to get through this phase. What's the easiest class I can take? I think many people have heard of like Rate My Professor or whatever, and this professor kept getting really good ratings. I was like, wow, maybe this might be a good class for me to take. Maybe it's an easy class. And so I sign up, it's in the business class, and business college, and I was like, sure, I'll take it. And I was there. And this professor was really changing what we talk about in classes, and he actually started the class with a mindfulness exercise. We talked about attention and where attention goes oftentimes in kind of the workspace towards productivity and not so much on ourselves. And so it was a lot on talking about how we do more introspection and how we should do more introspection, because a lot of the workplace really wants us to focus on the external, and the introspection is solely reserved for time off the clock and only reserved for at home. And so I wanted to come back to that because you brought up a really good point about talking about this, and I wanted to bring back what we were talking about to that point. This idea that this introspection can lead to talking with others about burnout. And I think there's this big idea that we should get through burnout on our own. And if we talk about burnout, we might be judged as not being as productive, or hear these comments of, oh, this person's just burnt out and they're out of it, or they're checked out type of thing, versus talking about it in a way of as a point of suffering, and as a point of I need some help, or as a point of I need things off my plate, or as a point of, hey, we should probably do something about this work environment we're both in. Are you feeling this way? I'm feeling this way. Is there room for stuff to change? And so I think these conversations and talking about it with someone not just gives us that support that we need, but I think it can lead to change with the conversations of, hey, is our employer taking advantage of us? Are they pushing us too much?
They are.
Yeah, yes, 100%. And Will is the director of our clinic, and so I just want to say he said yes to that. But I wanted to talk about that piece because talking about it, there's a big vulnerability aspect there of being vulnerable. I think can really open the doors towards not just feeling better, but things actually changing in the workplace for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like that's a really important thing to do when you have like the ability and privilege and safety to like do those things, right? The more we can use the access points we have, the privilege we have to advocate and communicate in those spaces, the more change we're gonna get, right? We have to like be the ones to take the lead on that.
I just can't stop thinking about toads now. Like, thank you, toads, for all the work that you have done and dismantling the system here and being the idiom of the day.
And like apparently you've been sacrificed, which is really messed up. And whoever learned that and made
Not
that
happening.
metaphor,
No.
they're like not a good person.
No.
Also, rate my professor. I have a 5.0 rating. I haven't taught in a long time, but that
Hey.
was I got 5.0, but I also got like a 1 for easiness. So
Oh,
yeah, it's
I
very
had-
easy, and I think that's why they liked me. Yeah.
I had a very similar experience. You know, I think I was like in the 4s, and I think I wasn't rated as
Can't
high
relate.
because I didn't interact as much because I was just like, hey, if you do the work, you're good. I think people were really eager to talk, and I just was like, hey, just do the work and you're good, type of thing, you know.
Yeah.
But
There you go.
yeah, I don't even know if Rate My Professor is still out there.
It still
type of thing.
exists.
It is?
It
Oh,
still
wow.
exists,
Quick
yeah.
response. Yeah, from the crowd. And so, yeah. I'm scared to go look back at my names now.
No, I'm hoping there's been no. I haven't taught. Well, I taught at Antioch, but yeah, and that didn't go quite as well. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm sure the comments are going to be just talks about toads.
Toadtalk.com. Yeah. You can go see
That's-
all our thoughts on Toad. www.toadthought.com/Dave and Will.
Hashtag /burnout /
Boiled
Boiled.
toads.
Still alive.
Boiled out.
Yeah.
I think
so-
one thing I was thinking of doing this time at the end is like grabbing the TikTok live
I
stream and
love
going through
that,
some of the
yeah,
questions because
yeah.
we usually don't get to those because it's so far away.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do that now.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
only 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
I know it's going to be
Let's
real
do
close
it.
to my face and the crotch shot below.
Yeah. So we apologize
That's
for the
what other
recording.
cameras. All right. Let's see what we got here. You
Oh,
gotta
yeah.
Get in here. Yeah. All right. Let me scroll up here. I don't. Oh yeah, I should do. I don't know how this works. There's
A lot of
stuff
toad
going
comments
here.
on there.
A lot of Toad comments. All right.
Yeah.
Burnout. Yeah, it's a great resource for burnout from Show. Also considers the issue of being a woman in the society. Huge process for burnout, especially in the patriarchal context. Not everyone remembers every phrase they ever learned, so true. That was probably for you in the Toad one.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
They're not doctors, fair.
Yep.
Boiling the frog. Okay.
Oh, is that what it is? Boiling the frog. You're right.
It's good to know.
All right.
Um,
Not a recipe.
Yeah,
It's this
so-
is yeah.
Let's see, guys, go ahead, Susie. Okay. How do you guys feel being a psychologist helps you guys combat these issues, unique lenses?
That's a great question.
yeah.
I have some thoughts and
for it.
yeah, it's funny. It's I often get this. I've seen this meme out there where it's like, how can a psychologist be sad or depressed? You have all the answers. Oh, it doesn't work that way. You know, we're still human and we still go through these things, and we still operate in that system. You know, I think there's often this argument that, well, if you want to conserve the energy, why are you driving a car, type of thing? Well, because we live in that system that has made us dependent on that. And so as psychologists, we still live through those experiences. And so the best I can do is acknowledge and try to fight and have conversations like this to dismantle that system a little bit more.
Yeah. And Scotch Lorate, good evening, high school teacher, last 14 years. The system is rigged, totally. It really is. It's built to do that.
And from a teacher perspective as well, 100%.
Bilbo Ballbaggins is your name. Pfizer because you made my heart stop. I felt like a bad student during psych undergrad because of depression, but I want to pursue clinical psych. It's a tough combo. Been there.
Yeah.
Been there.
Yeah.
Most universities come from Qatar. Okay. I don't know if that's true. I learned much from the book, How Nonviolence Protects the State, by it's a good book. Shouldn't be job training or activist training. It's now just training for activism. Focus on academic standards and eliminate ideology. Disagree with that. That person clearly isn't on our side. Okay. Huh? I think there's a few people who aren't our biggest fans in here too. Our system wants people to stay dysregulated. Being well or truly healing isn't good for businesses. Totally true.
Yeah.
It is impossible to be regulated in society built to cause us stress and pain.
Well, why do we have toad haters on here? Let's get rid of these toad haters.
Yeah, we're Team Toad.
We're
Never
Team
forget
Toad.
it. Right.
Like's great.
Exploring burnout's root in capitalist systems. Share your experience. Oh, totally. Oh, that's AI summary. Gross. Yeah, I feel we don't support AI here. I feel this especially with our country's investments in private prisons and private higher ed. 100%. Those things
100%.
totally related, totally
100%.
connected.
Think about charter schools. Think about private institutions and who funds them and who has access to them.
Hello.
Yes.
That's my dog. She's the best. Thank you, handsome reptile, for joining me.
Oh, yeah.
Wish you had a can instead of a bottle of Diet Coke. It's craftiness for me. I am all about the bottle, no can here.
No, I'm all can.
No, makes no sense.
Team can.
Right. Someone's watching this from work right now. Damn, that's rough. Harsh. All right.
It's okay, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
All right.
You can't show it. Oh, there it is.
That's, Team Toad in action.
Team Toad. Team Toad.
All right. I think we'll call it there. All right. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. You're all great. I appreciate you. And goodbye.
Bye. Thank you for showing. Bye.
All right. I don't know how to stop these things.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.